1990 was the year that Germany became unified, McDonald's opened in Russia, and Tom Cruise married Nicole Kidman. These are the top 10 films of 1990.
Now this is the plan. Get your ass to Mars.
At number 10, Total Recall. In 1987, Paul Verhoeven directed the film RoboCop, which proved to be a huge success and attracted the attention of Arnold Schwarzenegger. The two bumped into each other at a random restaurant in LA one afternoon. Schwarzenegger confessed that he loved RoboCop and very much wanted to work with Verhoeven. Total Recall was based on a Philip K. Dick story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. The film had been in development hell for over 16 years and had over 40 different drafts of the script that had been written. The movie is set in the not-too-distant future and features Schwarzenegger in the role of a construction worker who pays a company to give him a vacation by implanting a realistic false memory into his brain. What happens next is up for debate. There are some people, including Schwarzenegger and Verhoeven, who claim that the entire rest of the movie is a false memory in Schwarzenegger's head. But there are some that claim that Schwarzenegger's character was a secret agent all along, and the false dream that was implanted into his brain caused him to rediscover who he really was. The film featured an early appearance by Sharon Stone and would be remade in 2012, although the remake pales in comparison.
Kevin!
Home Alone.
Home Alone was the second biggest hit of 1990, and it made Macaulay Culkin the biggest child star since Shirley Temple. It is the ultimate family movie. Everyone I know has seen this film, and it has been a Christmas staple ever since it was released. John Hughes came up with the idea for this movie when he was leaving for vacation one day and tried to imagine what would happen if he forgot to actually bring his kids. A large portion of filming was done at a high school gym in Illinois, and Robert De Niro was actually the first choice to play Harry, which was eventually given to Joe Pesci. Daniel Stern, who played Marv, was at the time best known for being the narrator of the hit show The Wonder Years. Home Alone has left such a lasting impression that Macaulay Culkin later reappeared as Kevin McAllister in a commercial for Google Assistant.
Somebody! Somebody! Somebody help us!
What's happening?
I said that Home Alone was the second best-selling movie of 1990. Well, the biggest hit of the year was Ghost, starring Patrick Swayze. After Dirty Dancing was released in 1987, Swayze had become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. In the film, Swayze is murdered but remains on Earth as a ghost. He attempts to figure out the circumstances of his murder, as well as protect his girlfriend, played by Demi Moore. Whoopi Goldberg won an Oscar for her performance as a psychic who helped Swayze's character. Ghost was directed by Jerry Zucker, who at the time was most famous for his film parodies like Airplane. Ghost was totally unlike anything he had ever worked on before.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
I know that The Godfather Part 3 is nowhere near as good as the first two, but it is far from a bad movie. In Part 3, an older Michael Corleone is attempting to leave the mafia behind, but he just can't escape his past sins. The movie spends a lot more time focusing on who Michael is than previous films. His relationship with his daughter and his ex-wife is also examined, and we get a much clearer picture of the head of the Corleone family. The plot of the film involves Michael going into business with the Vatican and was inspired by a real-life banking scandal involving the Vatican Bank and the death of Pope John Paul I, who only served for 33 days. In 2020, an alternate version of The Godfather Part 3 was released called The Godfather Coda: The Death of Michael Corleone, which more closely represents the vision that Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo had for the film.
Whatever you're thinking about doing, please don't do it.
It's for the best.
Number 6, Misery. When I was in high school, I went through a Stephen King phase where I read almost all of his books, but one book of his that I never got around to reading was Misery. And that was only because I saw the movie, and what a movie it is. Imagine being famous and getting rescued by your biggest fan, only to discover that your biggest fan is actually a psychopath. In the film, James Caan plays a writer named Paul Sheldon who is injured in a car accident. He is saved by a nurse named Annie, played by Kathy Bates. Annie is a huge fan of Paul's, but after reading the manuscript of Paul's next novel, she becomes upset that he is killing off the main character and ending the series. She then proceeds to hold Paul prisoner and force him to rewrite the book to her liking. Bates won an Academy Award for her performance, and despite everything she has done since, Misery would be the film she is most remembered for. This is also the only film adaptation of a Stephen King novel to have won an Academy Award. At number 5, The Hunt for Red October. Speaking of a famous writer, in the early 90s, Tom Clancy was one of the biggest names in fiction, writing giant military and political thrillers that everybody's dad had to read. Many of his novels would be adapted into films, one of them being The Hunt for Red October, which had a phenomenal cast that included Sean Connery, Alec Baldwin, Scott Glenn, James Earl Jones, Tim Curry, Sam Neill, Courtney B. Vance, and future Senator Fred Thompson. The Red October is a Soviet submarine that is extremely quiet, and Connery plays its rogue captain who has ordered the sub to head towards the United States and whose true motives remain unknown. When The Hunt for Red October was released on home video, it was one of the first films to have a widescreen version on VHS. Most TVs in the 90s were 4:3 ratio, so when movies played on TV or were released on video, they were often pan and scan to fill the whole screen. But for this movie, you could see it just like it was in theaters. Number 4, Reversal of Fortune. This film may not be as popular as some of the other films on this list, but it is an incredible true story about Klaus von Bülow, who was found guilty of attempting to murder his wealthy wife. While out of jail pending appeal, Bülow hires Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz to represent him. The film is based on his book, and Dershowitz would go on to become even more famous for being one of O.J. Simpson's lawyers. But he always considered the Bülow case to be his most significant one. Jeremy Irons plays Bülow and gives the performance of his career, a performance that ended up earning him an Academy Award for Best Actor. When I saw this film for the first time, I knew nothing about the Bülow case, and like the characters in the film, I was just as invested in trying to piece together the evidence to figure out what really happened.
Klaus is a scapegoat.
He's obviously guilty of something pretty despicable.
You're a very strange man.
You have no idea.
I'm praying to you. Look at your heart. I'm praying to you. Look at your heart. Look at your heart.
Miller's Crossing is a gangster film that you may have never heard of. It was directed by the Coen brothers and stars Gabriel Byrne as Tom, a mid-level mobster during Prohibition. Just like most of the Coen brothers films, it combines intense moments with humor and snappy dialogue. Tom is thrust into the middle of a war between two gangs and must play both sides in order to survive. The film flopped and is arguably the least well-known of all the films on this list, but this movie is definitely worth your time. It features Albert Finney, John Turturro, Marcia Gay Harden, John Pilato, and Steve Buscemi in supporting roles.
I've always wanted to see the frontier.
You want to see the frontier?
Yes, sir. Before it's gone.
Number 2, Dances with Wolves. I almost had this film at number 1, and I went back and forth a lot on this movie. It's such an epic film and won several Oscars in 1990, including Best Picture and Best Director for Kevin Costner. Westerns were once the most popular film genre, but by the 90s, these kind of films were becoming rare. Most hit westerns of the 80s tended to incorporate lots of humor. There hadn't been a serious epic western since Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, which had been a huge disaster. But Dances with Wolves would prove that there was still hope for these kinds of films. It is an incredible story about a Civil War hero who journeys out west to see the untouched wilderness of America, and he forms a close bond with a local native tribe. The film was praised for the decision to include language spoken in Lakota, however, the authenticity of the language has been disputed. A sequel to the book Dances with Wolves has been written, but Costner has said that he has no plans to adapt it. Now, before I reveal the number one film on my list, I do have a couple honorable mentions. Pretty Woman. I know it's loved by many, and I think it is a great film. Julia Roberts won a Golden Globe for her performance in it, but I think that the films Roberts did towards the end of the decade are much better, such as Notting Hill and My Best Friend's Wedding.
Zan, we're gonna have to pump your stomach!
And Postcards from the Edge. This is an incredible story about the relationship between a mother and daughter, and it's based on Carrie Fisher's semi-autobiographical novel. Meryl Streep plays an actress studying to rebuild her career after a stint in rehab for drug addiction, and Shirley MacLaine plays her mom, whom she's had a difficult relationship with, but now must depend on. And now, the number one film of 1990.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Goodfellas. It's one of the greatest crime dramas ever made, and I personally think it's Scorsese's best film. Ray Liotta stars as Henry Hill in the true story about a gangster's rise to power and the events that led him to rat out his friends and enter the witness protection program, where he must spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. It features an incredible supporting cast that includes Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. The film is based on Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guys, and it had a tremendous influence on the future HBO series The Sopranos, which included many actors who appeared in Goodfellas. The dialogue is often highlighted as a standout aspect of this film, and apparently a lot of it was improvised. The use of long takes and tracking shots also make the viewer feel totally immersed in the action. There you have it, the top 10 films of 1990. Let me know in the comments if there's a movie that I left out. I'm planning on making more of these lists in the future, so please like and subscribe for more.
Let's